trafficker had them hooked on. I am not an expert in that. So that's why we have to seek out other agencies to help us. So what I did was I began partnerships with, I should say not began, but continued partnerships with Renee Jones Empowerment Center, the Harriet Tubman movement, various organizations that can help advocates get away from the life, to get away from the environment, to take them and remove them. Because going through the initial process of, say, let's say I give you an example of, we have someone that's hooked on heroin, and heroin, along with the violence, is a way of control used by the trafficker for someone to compel someone to engage in commercial sexual activity for hire. In order for me to go after the trafficker, I need to remove that victim and get them assistance. So becoming clean off the drugs is just the first step. Renee always used to tell us that this is the new Alcoholics Anonymous. This is something that his victims are going to need for the rest of their lives. And I know that everybody out here on this webinar knows and understands the damage and the trauma that it does to victims, whether it be through labor trafficking or sex trafficking. The damage that's done mentally to our victims and our survivors it cannot even be measured, because obviously it affects everybody differently. But one thing that we can honestly agree on is that it is traumatic in a sense that even I can't even begin to understand, because I haven't gone through it myself. So we had to seek out other agencies to help us with this. So you're talking about victim advocacy, you're speaking with hospital systems. We need to gain a relationship with our hospital systems. Believe it or not, about 40 to 50% of our cases come through the hospital systems. And when we've talked with survivors of whether labor trafficking and or sex trafficking, over 90% of them said they've been to a hospital before, but nobody ever recognized the signs that they were involved in something. So what we did was we started training and educating our hospital systems, all the way down to first our emergency service personnel, who are going to be the first one on the scene, whether it be fire or EMS. And then when they get to the hospital, if you can think about it, our triage nurses, our forensic nurses, or sex assault nurse examiners, or SANE nurses, as well as social workers that are involved in every aspect of the hospital system, to be able to catch and identify some of the signs early on. And then once these signs are noticed, they now know that they should notify the authorities, whether it be us directly in a task force, or whether it be the local authorities, even the hospital police department, to let them know that, hey, we've got something going on here that I think needs your attention. So that, in a nutshell, we've not only done that with one hospital system, but we have 3 or 4 major hospital systems here in Northeast Ohio, and we did that with each and every one of them. Not only our hospital systems, but our psychiatric hospital systems as well. Because a lot of people will come across as if they have some mental health issues, and a lot of them do. And if you'd been through the type of trauma that they've been through, you'd probably have some sort of mental health issues as well, to include PTSD, or what we like to call complex PTS. Because you already have, when you talk about complex PTS, you already have someone who is addicted to something. Then you have someone that's being forced into like sexual servitude. So you have a trafficker, and then so now there's more complex trauma, and then it just continues on. And so that's why we call it complex PTS. So getting back to the hospital system, we have a very good relationship with our pediatric mental health facilities as well as our adult mental health facilities. In fact, one of our largest cases that we just recently obtained a conviction on, the trafficker was sentenced to 172 and a half to 182 and a half years to life. Our first victim came from a mental health institution. That victim started the entire process. And it turns out that when we started tracking all of these things down and we began our investigation, it ended up being at least 9 victims identified. But again, it all started with someone that coming from an adult mental health facility. So you have victim advocacy, you have mental health, you have your social work institutions that you need to deal with. A lot of these victims are going to be without some sort of documentation. Here in the United States, we don't use passports as much here locally. It's usually a driver's license, a social security card, things of that nature. But when those things are taken by traffickers, we need advocates, social workers to help our victims regain their life back. And part of that is regaining their identity. So something small like a driver's license would be huge to one of our victims, especially when the trafficker has taken their identity from them. It's just another beginning of them becoming themselves, regaining control of their life away from this person or persons who have taken it from them. So when I started this process, one of the other things that I looked at is I looked at some of the law enforcement pitfalls that law enforcement fall into. And what I mean by that is sometimes we're our own worst enemies. Here in the United States, people who walk the streets or people who might be engaged in prostitution may be looked at as second-class or third-class citizens. People they won't pay attention to them. In fact, we had a serial killer here in Cleveland, Ohio, Anthony Sowell, who was able to get away with murdering at least 11 or had at least 11 victims buried in and around his house. And all of these victims were people that were off the street or engaged in some sort of the lifestyle of prostitution and obviously hooked on drugs. So what I've been trying to do with our trainings is I start with our law enforcement personnel to get them to understand that these people that you see walking the street are actually people too. When you see someone out at 2 o'clock in the morning, and here in Cleveland, the weather gets pretty cold and it's, 10 degrees outside, do you really think somebody wants to be walking the street when it's 10 degrees with a short skirt on and high heel boots? Absolutely not. So instead of going up to them and calling them out some sort of a derogatory term, let's look at them as people. For me, when I go out and I talk to some of these young ladies or some of these even men who are walking the street, I first offer them an opportunity to get off the street. And, we can't make adults who want to do things, we can't make them do it, but we always offer them the opportunity to escape or to get out whenever they possibly can. But what we'll also do is we'll say, look, we're offering you our help anytime you need it. But if you know of someone who might be under the age of 18 that's being forced into this, or someone who has a gorilla pimp, or someone who's being forced to be out on the street, would you at least call us and let us know? And so we call those sources. And so we have a lot of sources out there on the street. And I know Renee and her Empowerment Center go out on the Blade or the street track or the place where prostitution is still lingering in the streets. And I know that they've gone out and they've made contact with a lot of these victims as well. And a lot of them will actually help us. And so what I'm trying to explain to my law enforcement brethren is that sometimes we're our worst enemy. If you call someone a derogatory term, you think that they're actually going to help you when they actually they see something, and or if they go to turn to you for help, do you think they're going to turn to you when you call them out some derogatory term? And absolutely not. They would rather stay in the bad situation than trust you. So that's what makes it really difficult for us when we first engage with a victim of whether it's sex or labor trafficking, is the trust issue with law enforcement. They don't trust us. And so we have to build rapport with them in order to gain their trust. And the primary focus on that is you never, ever, ever overpromise and underdeliver. If you say you're going to do something, then you better do it. So don't promise them the world and give them a little piece of a house. You start small. You are able to make sure you're able to follow through with what you're telling them, and you will slowly build confidence. These victims are never going to talk to law enforcement right off for the very beginning. Sometimes it's going to take you 3 or 4 different interactions with them in order for them to begin to trust you. Because again, based on what our law enforcement brethren may have done to them, they're definitely not going to trust you initially. But if you show them, if you prove to them, because in their lifetime, people have always wanted things from them. They've always wanted something from them. All you want is to know, do you need a place to stay? When was the last time you had food? And how can I help you? And you will be surprised that, and sometimes in our first encounter with victims, let me cite you an example. So if I get called out to a hospital, one of the nurses that I talked about called and said that we think someone may have been involved in some sort of sex trafficking. We will respond. We told our nurses that it doesn't matter whether or not they were involved. If you have that feeling that they're involved, you call us, we will respond. We will go out there. What I will do is I first only ask a few questions. And I've learned this through even our law enforcement partners. So I don't know how it is in Africa, but here in the United States, if a police officer gets involved in a critical incident or gets involved in a shooting, law enforcement officials have 3 days to provide a statement to their internal affairs division. Why is it that we get 3 days? We get 3 days because we know and understand what trauma does to the memory. So when you get 3 solid sleep cycles, you will actually begin to remember more things. But what we don't do is we don't reciprocate that. So if we have a victim, why is it as law enforcement personnel are we requiring the victim to tell us immediately what happened to them right away, instead of giving them that same amount of time that we are provided for ourselves to regain our memory? So what happens as a result of that is that you may talk to a victim, she may or they may provide you with some details, but then 3 days later, when you go back and talk to them, they may provide you with more details. And now it appears as if something is off or something might be different. And are they actually being honest with you? Well, they're being honest with you, but they actually remembered more things, or maybe remember things a little bit differently because they got that sleep that was required to regain some memory. So what we have done is we're providing victims now with the same latitude that we get as law enforcement partners. So going back to my scenario, so if I respond to the hospital, I only have a few questions for them. My first question is, A, are you okay? My second question will be, is there anybody else that needs to get out of a situation that you were in? And if they say no, then my third question is, when was the last time you had something to eat? And my fourth question would be, do you need a place to stay? I'm not even getting into who, what, when, or where at this point. It's more about turning them over to the victim advocates and letting them handle housing or handle certain things and certain needs for the victims. And then I'll come back to them within about 2 or 3 days, again, letting them get that sleep cycle, letting them get that memory, that recall. And then I'll sit down with them on what we call a forensic interview, where the interview is recorded. And there, it's a one-on-one. It isn't 2 people talking to a victim. It's one person. Because if when you do these interviews, I'm sure a lot of you have done interviews, you'll see that victims and people that you're interviewing, whether it's a suspect or a victim, they're going to focus on one person. So why put 2 people in the room? That's why we record it, to protect the interviewer and the victim/survivor. And we meet with them and we go over and try to go over every aspect. Now, what you have to understand is that what trauma does to the brain. When you interview someone, their memory recall is not going to be in chronological order. It's going to be all over the place. So my main goal and my main focus in that interview is not to connect the dots. It's to collect the dots. It's to collect information. And then after the interview, we will then go around and say, okay, this is what the person said. I know they were all here and here and here, but when we can now put it in a timeline instead of trying to do it in the interview. Remember, when you do these interviews, more of them and less of you is the best thing. You let the victim talk. If you interrupt, you will disrupt their thinking process, and they may not even be able to get back to what they were, the topic that they were talking about, or the idea that was in their mind, because you interrupted them. Ask open-ended questions, let them answer, and then you can go back, but don't interrupt them. You take notes. Sometimes I audio record these interviews, but along with the video. But again, it's just collect the information. You can always go back once you corroborate some of this information. You can always go back. So, this is a topic that I could speak on for hours. Starting a human trafficking task force here in Northeast Ohio was a very large accomplishment for myself. But again, I can't take credit for everything. I have a great group of individuals that I work with, not only in my office, but my partners that I have that I've made throughout my tenure here, as well, like for the Salvation Army, all these different agencies that you need and require. Whatever you think a victim is going to need, you need to figure out who in your area can help you accommodate this victim, and you need to start building relationships with them, whether it be some housing, whether it be mental health, whether it be physical. One of our biggest problems that we have here is that once our victims obtain the medical care that's needed initially, once they get released, how do they do follow-ups? How do they get to follow-up care? How do they do these things? So when you are looking to meet with a non-governmental organizational partner, like for us, like Renee Jones, you have to explain to them that our victims need to get back to get to their medical appointments. They need assistance with this, they need assistance with that. And once you figure all of these things out, you start building all these relationships and you build this support group. And I'm going to tell you right now, the survivors that we've dealt with, I mean, I've dealt with kids as young as, I think the youngest kid I've ever recovered was 11. And the oldest person I've ever dealt with was 66 that was engaged in sex trafficking. And some of these children that I have recovered 14, 15 years old, I'm still in contact with today. And that's been over 10, 12 years ago. They still look at me and use me as a resource, use me as kind of like a mentor, so to speak. And that's what you're going to find, is that once you engage with our children and once you engage with these victims, you're going to be with them for the rest of your career. It's just something that they just, you are probably going to be the only person that has actually wanted to help them. And they will always remember that. I'm telling you, when you start doing these things and you start recovering, it's an addiction. It really is for us. Because just think about it. If you can save, I've always told myself this, if I can save one child and get that child back on the life that they had prior to being taken or being taken out of their original life, if I can save one child, then I've done my job. I'm happy. But when you save one, you want to save another, you want to save another, you want to remove these kids and adults, but you want to get them back on the track that they were before they were removed from their life. And for me, that's a part that I think is going to be difficult here when I finally retire, is giving up, trying to help people. I know that I can't explain everything to you all here in the 30, 40, 50 minutes that I have, but I am willing to answer any questions that you might have on anything that anything involving labor or sex trafficking. Renee?
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And what we're gonna do is, I'm going to unmute Maxwell, because we won't be able to get to everyone, but we are going to keep track of all of your questions, and we hope that this will be the beginning of many trainings that we will be able to provide as part of our global initiative. So we're going to record everything that you put in as a question, and then we're going to review it. And the questions that we don't get to today, it'll maybe be a topic that we will address at a later date. But I'm very happy to see everyone on board. And before I forget, I want to remind you, we had an error with the time issue. It started at 9 o'clock our time in the United States, but for you guys, we had 2 o'clock and it should have been 3 o'clock. So remember that for the rest of the week, it's 3 o'clock your time for the rest of the trainings. And thank you for those who stayed on board and stayed in the waiting room, because this is very important. And we're glad to welcome everyone from Africa and other countries. It started off just being something that we were going to do for a small group of people, and it grew into what it is right now, which is great. We're happy to have everyone involved. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to unmute Maxwell, because Maxwell, let me just say this about him. Maxwell came to the United States in March, and we met, and that's when I learned about the problem of human trafficking in Malawi, Africa. And we had him here, he spoke, we had him on a webinar, we did all this stuff to bring awareness. And we wanted to be able to, we were able to form a partnership with Malawi from his visit. And so this training is a result, it's the first thing that we've been able to do as part of our global initiative. My dream and vision is that we build such a powerful network throughout the world that we can address this in a major way, because it's gonna take everyone working on it. And that's why we have this training here today, so you can learn what we're dealing with, how we handle it. Where it's a lot of sharing of information and ideas and coming up with strategies to help you combat and fight this crime. So we have so many people on here. Maxwell. Go to Maxwell. Yeah, see if I can. Yeah. I'm gonna go down to the chat and start looking at some of these questions. Tracy, can you go over there and read some of these out here? Your glasses. We're gonna read some of the questions to you, Detective Morgan.
Okay, click out of here. Okay, these are people, okay, scrolling. There's no questions yet.
If you have a question, go into the chat box and write your question.
If I may, Renee,
Oh, there's Maxwell. Okay, good, Maxwell.
you got them? Okay. If I may,
Okay.
Renee, what I'd also like to say is this, is that, you know, a lot of people always ask me how do you get some, you know, some of our victims to actually talk to law enforcement? And what we found in a lot of cases is that putting the trafficker away will begin the dialogue between victims. So what we do now is we're looking at a targeted trafficker. I'm not specifically trying to put him away for human trafficking, or in the state of Ohio, it's called trafficking in persons. I'm trying to put that person in jail for any crime that I possibly can, because most of the time traffickers are not only just doing trafficking, but they're also doing drug trafficking, money laundering, and other crimes, sex crimes. So if I can put that person in jail for anything, any other crime, I will. And so once we put that person in jail, the victims tend to come forward a little bit easier, because they know that the person that is beating them is not beating them anymore.
Okay, perfect.
There you go.
Okay, great. We have a question. What
This
is
is
it?
actually just a comment.
Okay, read the comment.
Greetings, thank you. It's a recording. It's requesting a recording.
Oh, okay. Just keep going. Jonathan, is that Maxwell right there?
Yes.
Okay, Maxwell, we're unmuting you so you can,
You just muted him.
oh, where'd it go?
He's alphabetical.
I hope you can
There you go. Okay, good.
hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you so much, Rin, and Detective John Morgan, and the rest of the participants for joining this important conference that is happening at a time when we in Africa are facing quite an increasing number of victims of human trafficking that need our support. And we are having this discussion at a time when Lynn Jones, through the Global Initiative, want to introduce a global awareness campaign that will result to some sort of an influx of reported cases of human trafficking. And therefore, before that introduction of our global awareness campaign, we thought it wise that we should have this interface to have an engagement with organizational individuals on the ground who should be prepared to help any victim that will come forward for assistance. At the same time, also to help in terms of prevention of human trafficking. So we have participants from Zimbabwe, from Malawi, from Zambia, and other countries like Nigeria. who are part of this discussion. Since I'm not very familiar with the situation in your country, I would still maybe want to yield back the few time you allocated to me, Rain, so that at least we can hear one or two voices from the participants by way of raising their hand. This is all the time I think we'll have Detective John Morgan. We want to take advantage of this presence so that we're able to have an interface with you. Thank you so much for the time allocated to me. Win, you've got the time.
Because we have so many participants, it's hard to, you can't unmute all the people. So I want people to type in the chat box the question that they have for the detective. That'll be easier. And then we'll read the question. So if you have a question for Detective Morgan, just text it and type it in your chat box.
Okay, so you have to scroll down.
Okay.
Let's see.
Let's see if we get it.
Is it all information? Madame Renee Jones, I am Falata Moyo. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Most of us really want to build our capacity to be able to respond meaningfully to victim survivors of human trafficking. And I would like to know whether for the rest of the week we will be starting the training the time that we started today.
Yes, the answer is yes. The training, your time, we're in the United States. It was from start at 9, which I believe in Malawi is 3, because people were on, we had the wrong time too. But our time is 9 o'clock, so it would be 3 o'clock. Is that right, Maxwell?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. Be mindful that we also have participants from Zambia and Zimbabwe. So we are using the same time. Right?
Okay, good. So if you use the same time, okay, perfect.
So 3 o'clock their time.
Okay, great. So remember, everyone that's on, tomorrow, it will be 3 o'clock your time that we will start. Okay, is there anything else?
So let's see.
So I know there's a question here, Renee.
Okay,
It says, interesting experience shared by Detective John. He indicated the continued contact with survivors. How does he balance, maintain a healthy, helping relationship with the survivor? How does he and colleagues handle safe care and avoid burnout?
Good question.
Well, typically in the United States, detectives do this for about 5 years and they move on. That's typical of sex crimes. And as I shared before, I'm doing this for about 15. The problem is that there's not a lot of people that actually do what we do. And so I have to take care of myself. My wife is very understanding, and it's been difficult. I get called out at all hours of the evening, but again, you know, my children and my family understand what I'm doing. I have teenage daughters, and I do a lot of it because of my teenage daughters. So I avoid burnout by just enjoying my time with my family and my friends. And I don't talk about my experiences at work with my friends. My friends know not to talk about it with me. And that way I can escape for a little bit. So that's how I handle burnout. That and a little bit of alcohol.
okay.
Another question is, in the human trafficking discourse, at what point does a victim become a survivor? So the answer to that question in my reality is once someone identifies what is going on, because a lot of the victims will not understand what is happening to them. I've found that, you know, if a victim comes to me and says they've been involved or they're being human trafficked, most victims don't even understand that. But once they come to the realization that this is what's happening to them and they decide they want out, that's when they, in my mind, that's when they become a survivor. I have another question here. It says, how does law enforcement handle Stockholm syndrome where the survivor identifies and is positively attached to the perpetrator. Well, that happens a lot, unfortunately. And the trafficker knows and understands this as well. So let me cite an example. So in that case that I did where we got the 172-year sentencing, the bottom or the number one girl, she could have been charged. But we chose not to charge her for the things that she had done. But all through, it literally took a year and a half for us to go to trial on this. And the traffickers do this on purpose because they know, and pardon the expression, but keeping track of these victims is like herding cats to them. It's difficult. And they know if it was difficult for them, even though they were controlling them with heroin or some other drug, along with the physical violence, they know that when these girls start coming off of heroin or these victims start coming off of heroin or whatever drug it was, that it's going to be difficult for law enforcement to keep in track of them. And that's why, again, we deal with all of our victim advocacy groups, as well as our areas like the Renee Jones Empowerment Center to help us. We know that we don't have a strong victim, we don't have a strong case. And so these traffickers will purposely continue the case here in the United States. They will pretend like they're mentally unstable, so they need a mental health evaluation. So there's another 45 days. They fire attorneys. So that's another 60 days because the new attorney has to get caught up to speed on all of the evidence that we've compiled against our trafficker. They do little things like this to completely stall the case, to stall for time, because they know the longer it goes, the more of a chance that a victim might overdose, or a victim might go into the wind and we can't find them, or these victims will have moved past their experiences and don't want to testify because they don't want to relapse into a place where they just came out of. So what we're finding here is that with this Stockholm syndrome, no matter how often or what we tell some of these victims, I told one victim that she made $288,000 a year for him in sex trafficking. And she looked at me and she said, "Is that a lot of money?" Because that's all she cared about, was being high and being with him. That's all she cared about. Yes, there was Stockholm syndrome, but she still ended up testifying for us. And in fact, this poor victim, her left arm had been amputated because of the drug use. And she said on the stand, even though she was trying to be nurturing and trying to be nice to him, she said to us that the trafficker promised her a prosthetic and he never came through with it. And that was huge for the jury. But even though she has Stockholm syndrome, you are still able to get our victims to testify against the trafficker. It's kind of risky, but if you have established with the jury elements and pimp control, they will completely understand what is going on with these traffickers and the Stockholm syndrome. So listen, the Stockholm syndrome sometimes will never go. And in fact, that person that's in prison right now has called that same girl at least 100 times since he's been in prison. And there's nothing that you can do about that. You just have to continue on and go forward with the prosecution. You can't be afraid. So then the other question, Renee, is what's the connection between mental health and human trafficking? Well, the way I'll explain it is this, is that these traffickers look for any weakness in a person. Some are recruiting people who are already addicted to, say, heroin, and they exacerbate that addiction. They get them, they say, look, if you come work for me, you'll have all the heroin you want. But then once they get them hooked on their heroin, they'll only give them little bits and pieces of it, just enough to stay, not to not get dope sick, which makes them motivated to work harder to get more drugs and actually to make more money for the traffic. So where mental health comes in is that these individuals, these traffickers, they're great. They have what we call the gift for gab, right? They are experienced at getting people to fall for them, whether it be a Romeo or a lover boy pimp, or even what we classify as a gorilla pimp, one who beats his women, all of his girls, relentlessly. They are seeking someone, that mental health person, because they know, if you know or dealt with anybody who's had mental health issues, they'll tell you that they don't like taking their mental health medication because they don't feel well. It doesn't make them feel well, but they'll use street drugs instead of their mental health medications. And that falls right into the hands of the trafficker and the drug dealer. You have people who have mental health that may go and report things to the police, but some police, because they think they're quote unquote crazy, they won't believe what they're saying. So if you think about it, they're really good victims to target for traffickers, because nobody's going to believe them because, oh, they're crazy, right? So therefore, what better victim out there is there that's someone with mental health issues and already established mental health issues, because law enforcement is less likely to believe their story if they have a history of mental health. So the question, Austin says that, how do you ensure that identity of victims of human trafficking is kept confidential and safe? And the second part to that is, how do you ensure your safety? Advocates against human trafficking are mostly targeted by perpetrators. Now, I can't speak to the second part as advocates are targeted, because here in the United States, we don't see that often. And I can certainly understand why traffickers would target advocates, because they know that they're, if they can eliminate, the advocates are their greatest adversary besides someone like myself, because the advocate is really now trying to show this survivor the light and show them that, hey, your life isn't to be, either working for this guy, whether through forced labor or sexual servitude. Your life is your choice to do what you want to do. So of course, besides the law enforcement piece, the advocates are the ones that these traffickers would target, and that makes perfect sense. But as far as that doesn't really happen here. What we try to do is we try to keep our advocates' name out of everything. I know Renee has had people in her time, pimps have come to, to her location, but they haven't been as brazen enough to come in and say anything to her. But as far as keeping our victims and our survivors safe, we have something in the United States that's called discovery. The only thing that we can keep safe are juveniles, people under the age of 18. But here in the United States, the adults, the accusers have the right to see who they're being accused by, and they have the right in court to face them. Now, what we do is this: we'll use some place like the Harriet Tubman movement. What we'll do is we'll take them out of, say, Cleveland, and we'll move that victim to a place in Kentucky or to another state or Virginia or somewhere like that where they can get care. And then we'll bring them back at time of trial or time of grand jury to testify in front of the grand jury. So we remove them. And in fact, we even do it on a micro level. So let's say I recover someone from the west side of Cleveland. I don't take them to a hospital like I said I do. I would take them to the hospital on the east side of Cleveland, not on the west side of Cleveland, because the trafficker they might go to the local hospital looking for that victim. So what I'll do is if I recover someone from the west side, I'll take them to the east side and vice versa. And when we put them in the hospital system, we don't put them in under their real given name. We make up a name. It's more than just a Jane Doe or a John Doe. We give them a different name. So if a trafficker does come looking for them, it won't be the name that they know them by. So we do try to protect them. And it gets difficult when we have, say, 9 victims. And it even gets more difficult when we do things like these illicit massage businesses. These, what we call in the United States, illicit massage businesses or Asian massage parlors, which is really Chinese organized crime. But that is a completely different story that I can talk about later. But in retrospect, we do protect our victims as best as we possibly can. At some point, the victims' names have to be turned over to the defense counsel, and the trafficker will know who is going to testify against them. But our biggest thing is getting them away from this city, away from this town, away from this environment, get them healthy, and then let them come back. And when they come back, I got to tell you, they come back with a vengeance and they're ready to testify. And that's one of the ways that we were able to get such a large sentence on that gentleman, that trafficker, I won't call him a gentleman, just a few months ago. I think there's a few more questions, Renee, but I don't know how you all want to.
Oh, yeah, do you have time to answer them or if not?
Let's see here. A question was asked, do you identify survivors as they approach you? Do you identify survivors or they approach you for help? So we get our cases from several different outlets. One, as I stated earlier, was from hospital systems. Hospital systems will notify us if they think something is wrong. And in fact, all of our emergency rooms or our emergency departments have missing persons flyers up in them. We've been able to identify several people who were actually missing, who just came into the ER, basically because the nurses were able to look and look at the missing persons flyer for that month and say, oh my God, this child's missing. So we get references from hospitals, we get references from the Department of Children and Family Services when they think that juveniles are maybe involved in some sort of sex trafficking. We have a hotline set up. In the United States, we have something called the National Human Trafficking Hotline. But with our experience through that, it seems to delay tips to us, because if you think about it, it has to get processed through their center. They have to determine, okay, who are we going to send it to? And their email list is kind of outdated. So they may be sending it to a detective in that region that doesn't even work this violation anymore. So what we've done is we've set up our own local hotline through our sheriff's department, which sends tips to us like within minutes. And so people can call in anonymously, or they can leave their name. So there's several different mechanisms that we have that we can actually identify victims. And of course, you always identify victims when they're walking the blade or walking the street track. Those victims are easy to spot. It's just a matter of, will those victims actually talk to you? Another question is, how do you protect survivors from being trafficked again so they live a normal life? And that is a very difficult question to answer, because I have to tell you, social media is our worst enemy. Because I don't know how it is in your country, but in our country, everybody's got a cell phone and everybody's on social media and they can't live without it. If you try to take a cell phone away from a teenager, you are going to have a problem on your hands. So the biggest issue isn't us keeping them safe. The biggest issue is them keeping themselves safe. We ask and request of them not to go online, but it is almost in their DNA. They have to share where they are. They can't stay off of Instagram or Facebook for us old people. They can't stay off Instagram or Snapchat. The biggest thing I can tell you is to take away their ability to get on the internet. Sometimes our victims are our own worst enemies at giving up where they are, because these traffickers are out here searching for them, looking for them, and they know that they're addicted to, Instagram or Snapchat. So they're going to try to hook up with them through some of these social media sites because these victims can't stay off of it. I mean, I miss my flip phone. I love my old flip phone because I was never had access to the internet. Nobody could catch up with me. Now, I mean, you're available. The accessibility that you have is 24/7 now. So the biggest thing in keeping a victim safe is keeping them off the internet. That's easier said than done. Another question is, have you ever come across cases of humans being trafficked from other countries, whether from Africa or Asia or US? If yes, what kind of assistance do you provide to them? So yes, so what I failed to mention earlier in the presentation was that I am a task force officer with, I was task force officer with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 6.5 years. And for the last 7 years, I've been a task force officer with the Department of Homeland Security Investigations. Other people would know it as ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. But it encompasses removal, all these different things. But what we also have are continued presence visas. Even the FBI has to come through HSI to get continued presence visas. So a continued presence visa is if someone is brought in from out of the country and we identify them as being involved in some sort of a victim of, say, human trafficking or labor trafficking, we can give them and request for them and put an application for them in to have a continued presence visa. We're not going to recover them and kick them out of the country. We want them to stay. We want these people to stay. We want them to put the trafficker away. And that continued presence visa can be then later on down the line turned into something else, whether it be a student visa or whatever the case is, or you can claim asylum. So we have found people from out of the country. In our first, however, what I will tell you is this: in our first year of existence, in this task force, the Northeast Ohio Human Trafficking Task Force, myself and 2 other individuals, because we're just starting out, recovered 130 victims of sex trafficking alone in our first year. But of those victims, only 5 were from out of the country. What we're finding here in Ohio, and I can't speak for our border states, I can only speak for what's happening here. Most of the trafficking that's happening here in Northeast Ohio is what we call domestic trafficking, domestic sex trafficking, and labor trafficking. Not to say that it isn't happening. I'm just here to tell you that we haven't found a whole lot of it. Not to say it's not there, but we just haven't discovered a whole lot of it at this time. I can answer probably one more question. Okay, we kind of did that. Have you ever come across victims that are not cooperative and eventually turn hostile? If yes, how do you deal with that? How are your security agencies involved in the whole case prosecution process? Okay, so yeah, this will be the last question. So yes, I have come across victims who are not cooperative. And it all depends on where they are. So you definitely are going to find victims who the bottom is never going to be cooperative at first. And probably 8 times out of 10, I'm going to charge the bottom with the same thing that I'm going to charge the trafficker with. And in every instance that I've ever done that, somewhere down the line, that person decides to flip. Because they finally come to the realization that this trafficker does not really care about them. And they know they are tethered to a sinking ship and they do not want to go down with that ship. So in one instance, it took her 7 months to come to the realization that this guy doesn't care about me. And we were intercepting letters between the two of them in county jail. One trafficker even asked his bottom to commit suicide, and then 24 hours later he would commit suicide, and then they would be together in the afterlife, knowing that if she committed suicide, he wasn't going to commit suicide, but then now he just eliminated a witness against him. So for the victims who are lower in the totem pole, in the hierarchy, I should say, we do have some that are uncooperative, but it just takes time. Initially, everybody's uncooperative. But that's where you have to show them that you were here for them. In order to gain that respect, in order to gain that trust, you have to jump through hoops. And you have to gain that control, gain that respect, gain that that confidence that they will have in you, that you are here to help them. You're not like the trafficker. So it takes time, but yes, everybody I deal with is uncooperative and sometimes hostile. You just have to not get hostile with them, and you just have to let them run through their thing, because again, you're dealing with someone who's had a lot of trauma. And trauma will come out in different ways. I've had detectives and myself where victims have started beating on me. They're hitting me. Are they hitting me? No. They're angry. They're frustrated, and they don't know how to share their anger and frustration. So don't take it personal. You did nothing to cause this, but they're just bitter and angry. You have to be able to understand what is going on with your victim, and they will respect you a whole lot more for it. Now, the second part of that question is, how are security agencies involved in the whole case? Well, listen, when we initiate the case and then we go to grand jury with all of our evidence and we get an indictments, we never stop investigating the case, ever. Because we're doing search warrants on Facebook, we're doing search warrants on Instagram, we're doing all of these things, we're doing phone dumps. We are continuously out there looking for more and more victims of this particular person. The case is we never finish investigating the case until after the conviction. We are always looking for more and more evidence, because what we are trying to do is we are trying to get so much evidence on this trafficker that we do not have to subject our victims to testify in open court. They know and understand that there's a possibility. They always ask me, am I going to have to testify? I never lie to them. I always say there's always a possibility that you will have to testify. But what I'm going to try to do is try to get enough evidence on this particular person that you may not have to testify. And if so, if we were to offer them a plea, how many years would you be comfortable with for them to take a plea? Listen, I don't want, what we're trying to do also is move more toward evidence-based prosecution than witness-based prosecution. I've talked to several United States attorneys as well as our county prosecutors. And I always ask them this question and never have an answer for me. Is if, I did homicide for a couple of years before I went into sex trafficking. If I can prosecute a homicide case and my witness is dead because he was the victim of a homicide, and I get a conviction, why can't we do the same with human trafficking? Why do we need our victims to have to testify against these traffickers when in homicide cases, we can use other victims or other witnesses to corroborate what occurred? Why can't we do the same with human trafficking cases? And no one seems to be able to provide me a good answer for that quite yet. So with that, I'm going to have to relinquish my time to Renee.
Yes. Well, thank you, Detective Morgan, for providing, for being our first speaker in the training, for providing all this value. So I know everybody, they're on mute, but they're clapping for you. We appreciate you. We thank you for all you do, and we thank you for sharing it with the global community.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for being here. It is wonderful that we are able to do this. You know, if there's anything else that we can do to help with what's going on in our motherland over in Africa, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much. And I appreciate everybody for being here today.
Thank you. Great. And we're going to, so we're happy about all that information. Again, if there were questions that we didn't get to, we got to quite a few questions, which was good, but we're going to keep track of all of that stuff and be able to maybe come up with some other trainings or something to be able to address those things. But again, we're glad for everyone that came late with the time change and everything. We're glad that you came on board because it is very important training. So what we want to do with this training, we want you to understand how we're handling things here in the United States, specifically in Northeast Ohio. So Detective Morgan is one of the detectives that we work with victims. So we have a video that we want to show you. It's a 22-minute video because it's going to give you a good understanding of the work that we do and the victims that we see. And then we're going to talk about what's happening there and our next steps. So let's get this, can we get the video? Okay.
You have to do it on your end.
Oh, I do?
Yeah.
Okay, so hold on while we get this together. Okay, where's the, where'd you put the flash drive?
It's the restrooms. Yeah. It's in here. Okay, get out of this. I don't know, it's in here.
Okay, well, we have some difficulty getting to this video. We're gonna go to these slides, we'll keep it moving. So we'll have all this information available for you. I'm gonna find the video in here. But while we're waiting to figure out this video, we want to be able to go over some of these scenarios. This was a little bit about Detective Morgan, his background, and we'll send this out so that you can have this information, what he does, a little bit about his bio. But when we go back up, for those who, I know a lot of people just came on because we had a time change, but we want to just really reiterate a welcome and introduction, letting you know that human trafficking is a major issue. It affects millions of people around the world, including Malawi. And in this presentation, we wanted to really discuss human trafficking in the United States and in Malawi, as well as why it's necessary for us to talk about it, share knowledge, provide preventative and awareness education, and develops creative strategies to combat it in our communities around the world. Because even though the scenarios may be a little bit different, it all boils down to the vulnerability of people. Malawi, as one of the world's poorest countries, is particularly prone to human trafficking because of a lack of economic prospects and education, as well as populations who are uninformed about human trafficking. It makes it an easy target for traffickers. So it's very critical that we recognize the gravity of this situation and take appropriate measures to address it. Again, we were honored to meet Maxwell Madaware. He's a Malawian crime prevention expert with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes. And Malawi became the first country to join the Renee Jones Empowerment Center's global initiative on March 18th of 2023. And this training is our first from the global initiative. We want to extend a warm welcome to all the African countries who came on early, who just came on, as well as those who are joining us in the United States for this 5-day training. Again, we want to remind you that for the rest of the week in your time zone, it will be 3 o'clock because there was some confusion with the time. So every day for the rest of the week, the training will start at 3 o'clock your time for there. So while we're waiting to figure out what's our technical with this video, we want to share with you one of the strategies that we're working on when we met with Maxwell is we reviewed the type of trafficking situations that are happening in Malawi. And he has a book based on a true story. It's Human Trafficking in Malawi, The Untold Stories. And in this book are all of these true stories of trafficking situations. And it really, really struck me of what is happening and how we even though we're in different countries, there's a lot of things that can be done to prevent this from happening. And a lot of it is making people aware of information, what trafficking is, how to protect themselves, and being aware about it. So this was one particular story in the book, was a true story that really stuck out to me, and it's an example of sex trafficking that's happening there. When you have a lot of poverty and you have a lot of lack, then everyone wants a better life, no matter where you're from. Everybody wants to be able to take care of their family. They want to be able to provide for their families and have a better life. So when you have a trafficker who knows that, and he knows that he can come into a village, he can come into a community, or he or she, because a trafficker can be a male or a female. It could be anyone that is taking advantage of someone's vulnerability. Vulnerability could be poverty, lack of access, lack of education, low self-esteem, many things that can make someone become vulnerable to a trafficker. But in this case, this young lady was an excellent student, and both of her parents passed away. And she had a brother and a grandmother. And the grandmother, of course, stepped in to try to take care of them, but the grandmother it was a hard struggle for her. So the nurse that had been caring for her mother, this is somebody that had been in her house daily that she's seen. So of course she built trust and care with that person, and this person would encourage her. You're a great student, keep doing what you're doing. So that's step one. So I wanted to kind of go through and share with you how these things had, number one, lies of a promising future. So to someone who is a bright student, who's been admired by their fellow students and teachers, and some had even encouraged her that she could be a novelist or journalist. And I'm sure that she could. She had all of that talent. So that was, it was, some people were telling her lies of a promising future. Number two, the grooming and the building trust phase. In a time of grief and despair, anybody can become vulnerable because you can be so overcome with grief. But because she trusted her mother's caregiver nurse to give her trustworthy advice for her future educational goals for a better life, for her and her brother. You know, if you look at that scenario, anybody could have thought, wow, this is great. This person is for me. I can trust whoever they introduce me to. Number 3 is the lack of knowledge of human trafficking that led to her becoming a victim. Because it seemed like a great opportunity and life was really hard after the death of both of her parents. It looked like a chance for her to get a great education and have a better life for not only her, but her brother. But instead of going to school, she was sent to a brothel where she was trafficked and taught by the trafficker how to sell herself in this brothel. And it was a really traumatic experience. And so the consequences of sex trafficking can be very severe and long lasting. Victims can suffer physical and psychological harm, including sexually transmitted infections, unwanted pregnancies, and mental health issues such as depression and anxiety. And it's crucial that we raise awareness about this issue and take action to prevent it. And what we're doing today did not require us to have thousands of dollars. It required us to share information, which is part of this initiative. You learn from each other. You learn what other people are doing to fight it. Human trafficking, prevention and awareness education saves lives. Another scenario there is, which really struck me when Maxwell was here, was trafficking for organ removals. So I went through some of these scenarios and I wanted to share because these are enough scenarios with, these are young teenagers and young children being trafficked, and we can fight this because we need to make people aware in rural areas, in areas where they may not understand. We have to come up with strategies to help them protect themselves from becoming victims. And in this particular scenario, when I seen this, I was really more motivated to make sure that we continue to pursue this global initiative. Because trafficking for organ removal is pretty much, it seems unbelievable. But in this scenario, true story, these kids out playing like kids do, and they're having a good time. They're, you know, and somebody just comes out in the night and grabs one of them and kills them basically for their organs. And then, you know, the next scene, the next part of it is the parents are made aware that this has happened to their child. And, you know, and if they had had any kind of information, kids could have been, you know, taught. You got to be careful when you're out. If we make children aware of the dangers without scaring them, but also giving them enough knowledge to be aware that these things can happen. So that was another scenario that I wanted to share with you. Also, labor trafficking, because there's a lot of victims. If you are looking for an opportunity to take care of yourself as well as your family, this is huge, this labor trafficking. And these are areas that we really want to zone in on and make sure that we are educating people in the country about this issue. And that takes a lot of organizations coming together, doing what you're doing here today, gaining information, learning what other organizations are doing. And even though we are in different countries, you can take some of the things that you learn and they can be tweaked to work where you are. And education and awareness of this issue is one of the key things that can save lives. So we're gonna go back. Okay, so I hope that you were able to, Maxwell, would you like to share a little bit on this part?
No, I think you have said it all. I'll to be sharing as we go.
Okay, so did you want to add anything?
That was great.
Okay, so we had a video that we want to share. Okay, we're gonna just give us a second to get this video, the technology of this video together, because we want you to see. Again, if you have any questions, put it in the chat box. And we will definitely keep track of it. They did the dragons on. It is not only. Oh, that's the dragon. Something. Okay, well, we apologize. We can't get this video to work, but we hope that by the end of the training, we would have figured out what the technical issue is for the video. So at this time, we're going to wrap up because the video was our last part, unless you have any questions that we can answer. Okay, there is a question on here. Who are the most at risk? Men, women, youth, and children. I can tell you here, what we see at our center is, matter of fact, I always tell people everyone is at risk. Because if you have a vulnerability that a trafficker can take advantage of, they will do that. We see more women, from the age range of like maybe in their 20s up to older ladies have been trafficked. When we do street outreach, which you will learn about later this week, we see a lot of people on the street that are being trafficked. That's why we do street outreach. So I would say that men, women, and young kids specifically, like Detective Morgan said, because of here in the United States, they have access to the cell phones and they meet people online, and they overshare information. So just by talking to someone online, they build a relationship. This person, they share what's going on. Maybe they're having trouble at home. Maybe there's some type of problem in their lives. And they build a relationship with this person till eventually they go and connect with that person. So I would say the answer to that are we see more women, youth, and children. But we know that we've had several men come to our center for services. However, a lot of men that are being trafficked don't come forward because of the shame. So we try to make sure that when we're doing education and awareness that we talk about that. Because if a male is being trafficked, we will provide the same services that we provide to any other victim of human trafficking. And I think that was the last question. So we thank you for joining us. We apologize for the time change, the conflict, the little misunderstanding, but thank God that you all came on. This was a great turnout. I'm so glad that you came. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and I thank all of you from the United States to Africa. We are excited about what is going to happen. We come to make impact, and if you're on here, you come to make impact and as well, and together we can make impact around the world. Believe that. So thank you.
Maybe Elaine, before you go, would you want to talk about tomorrow?
Yes, okay, I can do that. I can share what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Sure can. So tomorrow, we're gonna talk about the importance of providing trauma-informed programs and services for human trafficking victims. You're gonna learn what services that we provide for victims in the United States. So you're going to meet Chanel Harris. She is the manager of our major hospital system called Metro Health Trauma Recovery Center. And they work with victims of trauma, human trafficking victims and all sorts of trauma. They have a center that's hospital section is totally focused on trauma. So she's gonna share with you what they do, what the hospital provides. And then you're gonna learn from the center all of the trauma-informed services that we provide to victims. And our hopes is that as we continue with this global initiative with Malawi, that eventually the services that we are providing to our victims, that just like you're joining us via this conference, we will be able to do this for victims, from victim to victim, that they can be in this very room that you're looking at and be a part of whatever we're offering, whether it's art therapy or whatever we can do, or a support group. That will be one of our goals as well. So that is the agenda for tomorrow. Remember, it will be at 3 o'clock your time. And we look forward to seeing each and every one of you. And again, thank you for joining us. Maxwell, thank you for organizing everything. And thank each and every one of you for attending. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye.